The call came at 6:37 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been awake since 5, lying in the narrow bed of a holding cell in Maricopa County, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked like the state of Florida. My phone had been returned to me 20 minutes earlier, along with my wallet, my belt, and the small pocket knife I carry out of habit. The duty officer slid everything through a slot without looking at me. I was 63 years old. I had never been arrested in my life, and I had spent the previous 40 hours in that cell because of a traffic stop that turned into a sobriety checkpoint, that turned into a breathalyzer that I failed by a margin I still to this day dispute. But that is a different story. The point is, I was there. In Arizona. 412 miles from my house, I answered the call because the number was local. Local to home, to Nevada. And I thought it might be my daughter calling from a neighbor's phone. We had argued before I left on the trip. Something small that became something large, the way small things do when a marriage has been quietly failing for years. It was not my daughter. Mr. Calloway? A man's voice. Flat, professional, speaking. This is Detective Ruiz with the Henderson Police Department. I'm calling because a complaint has been filed. A restraining order application, actually. Your wife came in yesterday afternoon. I sat up on the edge of the cot. The cell smelled like industrial cleaner, and something underneath it I didn't want to identify. My wife, I said. Yes, sir. She's alleging that you've been following her, showing up at locations where she is, parking outside her workplace. She says it's been going on for about 6 weeks. I looked at the wall in front of me. There was a phone number scratched into the paint. Below it, someone had written the word patience in careful block letters. I thought that was either very funny or very sad. Detective, I said, I'm in a holding cell in Maricopa County right now. I've been here since Tuesday morning. A pause. Sir, I was detained Wednesday evening during a checkpoint stop. I have been in this facility for approximately 40 hours. I can give you the booking number. I can give you the name of the duty officer who processed me in. I can give you the name of the arresting officer. I reached down and picked up my wallet from where it sat on the cot beside me. I have a receipt from a gas station in Wickenburg, Arizona, dated Tuesday afternoon, time-stamped at 2:14 p.m. I have a receipt from a motel in Surprise, Arizona from Tuesday night. My phone's GPS, if you pull it, will show every location I have been since I left Henderson on Monday. Another pause. Longer this time. She filed the complaint yesterday, he said, and his voice had changed slightly. Something careful had entered it. What time yesterday? Around 3 in the afternoon. I was in this cell at 3 in the afternoon yesterday. I was in this cell at 3 in the afternoon the day before that. I have not been in Nevada since Monday morning. The detective asked me to spell my name. He asked for the booking number, which I found after a few minutes of searching through my phone. He asked me not to go anywhere, which, under the circumstances, I found almost amusing, and he said he would be in touch. I set the phone down on the cot and sat there for a moment in the quiet. 6 weeks, he had said. She was claiming 6 weeks of stalking. 6 weeks of following her. 6 weeks of parking outside her workplace. I thought about what I had been doing for the past 6 weeks. I thought about the Wednesday evenings I had spent watching baseball in the living room while my wife was at her book club, or said she was at her book club. I thought about the weekends she spent visiting her sister in Reno, the same sister she had been visiting more and more frequently over the past year. I thought about the silences at dinner that had grown so comfortable we had stopped noticing them, the way you stop noticing a hum from the refrigerator until the day it stops, and the silence is suddenly louder than the sound ever was. My wife's name is Darlene. We had been married for 31 years. I was released from the Maricopa County facility that afternoon. My daughter, her name is Petra. She lives in Scottsdale, a fact that was the actual reason for my trip. Picked me up at the front desk. She did not say anything about the situation for the first 10 minutes of the drive. That is how I raised her. You let things settle before you speak. Mom called me, she finally said. What did she say? She said you'd been following her around. Watching her. Petra kept her eyes on the road. She has her mother's jaw and my eyes, a combination that makes her look perpetually skeptical. I told her that was insane. You've been here for 3 days. I know. She said maybe I was covering for you. I looked out the window at the desert moving past, the saguaros throwing long afternoon shadows. Petra, I said, how long have you known something was wrong? She didn't answer right away. That was its own kind of answer. About a year, she said quietly. Maybe a little longer. I nodded. I had known for about that long, too. You know before you know. You feel the shape of something changing even when you can't see the thing itself. The book club nights that ran later and later. The phone that was always face down on the counter. The way she laughed at something on her screen and then turned it away before I could see. Not big things. Never big things. Just a slow accumulation of small angles that don't add up to a straight line. I stayed with Petra for 2 more days. During that time, Detective Ruiz called back. Mr. Calloway, I've confirmed your location. The Maricopa County records are clear, the GPS data is consistent, and we've spoken to the arresting officer and the duty staff at the facility. He paused. The timeline your wife provided doesn't hold up. I know. There are going to be some follow-up questions for her regarding the complaint. A false police report is a misdemeanor in Nevada. Depending on how this develops, there could be additional charges related to filing a fraudulent restraining order application. I sat in Petra's guest room with the afternoon sun coming through the blinds in long stripes across the floor. Did she know I was in Arizona? I asked. A pause. She knew you had left for a trip, he said carefully. Whether she knew the specifics, I can't say. But I could say. Because I had texted her from Wickenburg. I had sent her a photograph of the desert at sunset. One of those impulsive things you do when you've been married a long time, when some part of you is still trying, and she had responded with a single word. Nice. And nothing else. She had known exactly where I was. She had filed the complaint anyway. When I got home, the house felt different. Not in any dramatic way. The furniture was where it had always been. The photographs on the hallway wall were the same photographs they had always been. My coffee mug was still in the cabinet to the left of the sink, which is where I have kept it for 23 years. But something in the air had changed. The way the air changes in a room where an argument has recently happened. A particular quality of settled disturbance. My wife was in the kitchen when I walked in. She was standing at the counter with a cup of tea, and she looked at me when I came through the door the way you look at someone you expected to walk in, but had also, somewhere underneath the expectation, hoped wouldn't. You're back, she said. I am. She wrapped both hands around the mug. She has small hands. After 31 years, I still notice that. I've been thinking about what I want to say. Take your time, I said. I set my bag down by the door and walked to the kitchen table and sat down. I've been thinking too. What followed was not a fight. I want to be clear about that because I think people expect, when they hear a story like this, that there must have been a fight. Raised voices. Accusations meeting counter-accusations like weather systems colliding. That is not what happened. What happened was quieter and in some ways more devastating than any argument could have been. She sat down across from me. She was still holding the mug. She said she had been unhappy for a long time. She said she had been unhappy for a long time. She said she didn't know how to leave. She said she had met someone, a man named Gary, who worked with her at the insurance office, who had been a colleague for 4 years, and something else for about 8 months. She said the restraining order application had been a mistake. She said she had panicked. She said she thought if there was a legal reason for distance, it would make things easier. I listened to all of it. I kept my hands flat on the table. I have a temper. I am 63 years old. I know my own faults. And there have been times in my life when I have let it get ahead of me. This was not one of those times. I don't take any particular credit for that. I think I was simply too tired to be angry. And underneath the tiredness, if I'm being honest, was something that felt uncomfortably close to relief. The detective called me, I said when she was finished. She looked down at the table. There may be charges, I said, not from me, from the department. False report. Fraudulent application. I don't control that. She nodded slowly. I want you to understand something, I said. Not because I want you to feel bad, because I think you need to hear it. I waited until she looked up. I was sitting in a cell in Arizona when you filed that complaint, 48 hours in a 6x8 room. And instead of calling to tell me, to talk to me, to do anything that a person who shared 31 years with another person might do, you filed a legal document designed to damage me. I paused. That's not a mistake. A mistake is something you do without knowing better. You knew better. She didn't answer. There wasn't much to say to that. We sat in that kitchen for another hour. We talked about the practical things, the house, the accounts, what would happen next. I was calm through all of it. I am not telling you this to make myself sound like a saint. I am telling you because I spent 20 years of my working life as a civil engineer, and what that teaches you, more than anything else, is that the structure either holds or it doesn't. Emotion doesn't change the load. You assess. You document. You proceed. The divorce process began 3 weeks later. My attorney's name is Carol. She has handled family law in Henderson for 22 years, and when I sat down across from her desk and laid out what had happened, the restraining order application, the false complaint, the documented alibi, the 40 hours in the Maricopa County facility, she looked at me over the top of her reading glasses with an expression that was equal parts professional concern and something that I think was personal outrage on my behalf. She filed while you were in custody in another state, Carol said, confirmed and documented. And she knew you were there. I have the text exchange, time-stamped. Carol wrote something on her legal pad. This changes the picture significantly, she said. What it changed specifically was the question of the marital assets, my wife. I was still calling her my wife, though by then she had moved in with her sister in Reno. The sister who had been hosting what turned out to be rather less family-oriented visits than I had understood had been operating under the assumption, I think, that a restraining order and a harassment complaint would create a narrative that would serve her in the proceedings. A husband who stalks, a wife who had to flee. The story has a shape that courts recognize. The problem for her was that the story had collapsed. The detective's report was thorough. The Maricopa County records were unambiguous. My GPS data, pulled properly and presented properly, drew a line across 400 miles of Arizona desert that made her timeline not just unlikely, but impossible. And then there was Gary. I had not gone looking for that information. I want to be clear about that. I am not the kind of man who hires investigators and goes through phones and builds cases the way some people do in divorces. The way some divorces seem to demand. What I had were 8 months of small absences and silences, and what I found, not searched for, was a series of charges on a shared credit card to a hotel in Las Vegas that corresponded precisely with a weekend she had spent allegedly visiting her sister. The hotel was 40 minutes from her sister's house. She had not spent the weekend with her sister. Carol presented this information in the context of asset division, not as moral argument. Courts are not particularly interested in moral argument, but as material evidence bearing on the question of fault and the distribution of what two people had spent 31 years building together. The final settlement took 4 months. By the terms of it, I kept the house. I kept my pension, which was the thing I cared about most, the thing I had been building quietly for decades, for exactly the kind of future that was now arriving in a form I hadn't anticipated. My wife received a fair share. I did not go into that process trying to leave her with nothing, and Carol understood that was not what I wanted, but the narrative she had attempted to construct, the one that began with a complaint filed in the Henderson Police Department while I was sitting in an Arizona holding cell, did not survive contact with the evidence. The misdemeanor charge for the false report was resolved with a fine and a period of probation. I did not push for more than that. People have asked me why not, and I find the question difficult to answer in a way that sounds the way I mean it. The truth is that I had spent 31 years with this woman. I had watched her raise our daughter. I had watched her grieve when her father died. I knew the particular sound of her laugh and the specific way she held a book and the fact that she always ran the dishwasher too soon before it was full. a habit that drove me quietly insane for 3 decades. She was not a villain. She was a person who had made a series of increasingly bad decisions in the service of avoiding a hard conversation, and who had, in the end, made one decision that was genuinely wrong. I am not interested in her suffering. I am interested in my own life, which at 63 still has considerable distance left to run. The house is quiet now. I've rearranged a few things. Not dramatically, not the way people do when they're trying to erase something, but practically. I moved my reading chair to a different corner of the living room because the afternoon light is better there, something I had always noticed but never acted on because it would have required moving her side table. I planted tomatoes in the backyard in March. I have been sleeping well for the first time in about 2 years, which is its own kind of information. Petra calls twice a week. We have long conversations about nothing in particular, her work, a book she's reading, her opinion of a restaurant she tried. She does not bring up her mother often, and when she does, it is with a careful neutrality that I recognize as the neutrality of a person who is managing 2 separate relationships and doing it with grace. I am proud of her for that. I told her so. Gary, as far as I know, is still in the picture. I find that I have no particular feelings about this. They are 2 adults navigating their own situation, and that situation is no longer mine. What I think about in the mornings when I'm sitting with my coffee and the house is still and the light is coming in through the kitchen window, the way light does in the desert, flat and clear and unambiguous. What I think about is the 40 hours I spent in that holding cell, the water stain that looked like Florida, the phone number scratched into the paint, the word patience in careful block letters, written by someone I'll never know, in a moment I'll never understand. I think about the fact that if the checkpoint stop hadn't happened, I would have been home that week. I would have walked back into whatever version of my life was waiting for me, and I might never have known what she had already set in motion. The restraining order would have landed differently. The story would have had a different shape. Sometimes what looks like the worst possible thing turns out to be the thing that shows you clearly what you're actually standing in. I was 63 years old, sitting in a cell 400 miles from home, and my wife was filing a false police report against me. I had 40 hours and a water stain and a word written on a wall. I was also, it turned out, going to be fine. You don't have to explode to survive. You don't have to burn everything down to walk away from it. Some exits are loud and some are quiet, and the quality of the exit has nothing to do with how much it cost you to make it. I finished my coffee. I went outside and checked on the tomatoes. The desert morning was clear and cool and entirely my own. There is a version of the story where I come home from Arizona bitter and broken, where I spend the next few years angry at Darlene, angry at myself, angry at the 31 years I gave to something that turned out to be quietly hollow at the center. I understand that version. I have met men who are living it. It is not a shameful place to end up, but it is a place you can leave if you choose to. What I keep coming back to is this. Everything that happened to me had a cause. Not fate, not luck, not some invisible hand moving pieces on a board. Cause. Darlene had been making choices for 8 months before that morning in the holding cell. Small choices than larger ones. Each one made easier by the one before it. The way a path through a field gets worn down, not by one person walking it, but by the same person walking it again and again until the grass stops growing back. The false report was not an explosion. It was the last step on a path she had been building for a long time. And the path I had been on, the one where I noticed the silences and the face-down phone and the weekends in Reno and said nothing, did nothing, kept the peace at the cost of the truth. That path had its own consequences too. We had both been traveling toward that kitchen table conversation for longer than either of us wanted to admit. I think about Kenneth, about the man I was when I walked into that facility in Maricopa County, frustrated and tired and completely unaware of what was being constructed 400 miles away in my name. That man had spent years being patient in the wrong way. Patient meaning silent, patient meaning avoidant. Patient meaning that he had mistaken the absence of conflict for the presence of peace. Those are not the same thing. I know that now with a clarity I did not have before. Real steadiness is not the same as stillness. A man who never speaks is not necessarily a man who has nothing to say. Sometimes he is just a man who has gotten very good at not saying it, and that silence has its own cost, paid eventually by everyone in the room. What the experience gave me, what 40 hours in a cell and a detective's phone call and a 4-month divorce process gave me, was precision. I am 63 years old, and for the first time in perhaps 2 decades, I know exactly what I have, exactly what I lost, and exactly what I am building now. The pension is intact. The house is mine. The tomatoes are coming in better than I expected. These are not small things. They are the architecture of a life, and the architecture held because I'd spent 30 years building it carefully, even when I was not paying attention to everything else. Integrity is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It is just the slow accumulation of doing the right thing when the wrong thing would have been easier. And then, when everything is on the table and the documents are in front of a judge, it turns out that all those quiet years of doing things correctly have left a record. The record speaks, you don't have to. That is what I would tell any man standing where I was standing. Not that it will be easy, not that it will be fast, but that what you have built honestly cannot be taken by someone who built a story dishonestly. The truth has a particular weight, and in the end, everything gets weighed. I checked on the tomatoes this morning. The light was good. The air was still. I had nowhere to be and no one I was hiding from, and nothing I was pretending not to know. That is enough. That is, in fact, a great deal.